Welcome to the Echoes of Ihsan podcast. Today we're embarking on a fascinating deep dive, into the heart of early Islamic culture.
Sounds intriguing.
Yeah, we're going to be exploring the concept of Ihsan,
Okay.
which is often translated as, excellence, virtue, or beauty.
Right.
But it's really so much more than that. It's
Absolutely.
about striving for perfection in every aspect of life,
I like that.
big or small, seen or unseen.
It's a very holistic approach, isn't it?
It is. And what's fascinating is that this pursuit of Ihsan wasn't limited to grand acts of worship or profound spiritual insights.
Right.
It extended even to seemingly mundane aspects of life, like how people dressed.
That's right. And what's so interesting is that we have these sources that give us these amazing insights into how early Muslims approached clothing and adornment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to guide us on this deep dive, we'll be exploring the Muwatta Imam Malik,
Okay.
specifically Book 48, which focuses entirely on dress. This text, compiled in the 8th century, offers a treasure trove of insights into how early Muslims approached clothing and adornment.
It's a window into a world where the act of getting dressed wasn't just about covering the body, but about expressing one's inner state, reflecting shared values, and striving for a deeper connection with the divine.
Okay, let's unpack this. The first section of the book jumps right into the concept of wearing clothes for beautification.
Okay.
And it starts with a rather powerful story about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, during a raid.
I've heard this one.
You've heard this one.
Uh-huh.
So imagine the scene, a group of early Muslims on a military expedition facing danger and uncertainty.
Right.
Yet even in this context, the Prophet emphasizes the importance of taking care of one's appearance.
It's really interesting.
The story goes that Jabir ibn Abdullah, a companion of the Prophet, was resting under a tree when the Prophet joined him.
Okay.
Jabir offered him shade and then went to such a small cucumber for him to eat.
Oh, wow.
A simple act of hospitality amidst a challenging situation.
Precisely. But here's where it gets really interesting. Jabir mentions another companion who was guarding their mounts. This man was wearing two worn-out cloaks. The Prophet noticed this and inquired if the man had any other clothes.
And when Jabir confirmed he had 2 more garments in his bag, the Prophet instructed him to give the man his better cloth.
And what's so striking is that the Prophet doesn't just suggest it, he commands it, even remarking, "May Allah strike his neck, isn't that better for him?"
It's a powerful statement that reflects the importance placed on dignity and self-respect, even in the midst of a military campaign.
Right.
It suggests that taking care of one's appearance, even in difficult circumstances, can be an act of striving for Ihsan.
Absolutely.
The companion, perhaps misunderstanding the Prophet's tone, suggests it would be better to die in battle for the sake of Allah.
Oh, wow.
And the Prophet, reaffirming the man's piety, responds with, "In the way of Allah."
It's a fascinating exchange
That's
that
great.
highlights the nuances of early Islamic thought.
It challenges the notion that piety and outward appearance are mutually exclusive. It suggests that Ihsan isn't just about renouncing worldly things,
Uh-huh.
but about striving for excellence in all aspects of life, including how one presents oneself.
I see that.
So even in the face of potential conflict, even when focused on a higher purpose, the Prophet emphasizes the importance of self-respect and dignity reflected in one's appearance. That's a really interesting perspective.
And this perspective is further echoed in Umar ibn al-Khattab's preference for seeing Quran reciters in white garments. Now, the color white across many cultures is associated with purity, cleanliness, and respect. By associating it with the recitation of the Quran, Umar highlights the reverence and honor due to the divine word.
It's like the outward appearance becomes a reflection of the inner state, a way to embody the purity and sanctity of the Quran.
Exact.
And then we have Ibn Sirin's statement, which adds another layer to our understanding. He says, Allah has been generous to you, so be generous to yourselves. Let a man wear a combination of his garments. It seems he's encouraging people to enjoy the beauty of clothing.
That's right. It suggests that appreciating the beauty of clothing, taking pleasure in combining different garments, can be seen as an act of gratitude for Allah's blessings.
Right.
It's about acknowledging the bounty in our lives and expressing it through our appearance. And this idea of expressing gratitude through one's appearance resonates with the broader concept of Ihsan. It's not just about following rules, it's about embodying a spirit of excellence and beauty in every aspect of life.
It's amazing how even the simple act of getting dressed can be imbued with so much meaning. It seems early Muslims saw a connection between inner virtue and outward appearance.
Absolutely. And this connection continues as we move into the next section of the Muwatta, which focuses on dyed garments and gold.
Mm.
Here we see both acceptance and restrictions, highlighting a nuanced approach to adornment in early Islam.
Okay, let's delve into that. The book mentions Abdullah ibn Umar, a prominent companion of the Prophet, wearing garments dyed with red earth and saffron. The saffron, as you know, was a precious spice and dye, often associated with luxury and beauty.
This detail suggests that colorful clothing wasn't frowned upon in early Islam. In fact, the use of dyes like saffron, which were quite valuable, indicates an appreciation for aesthetics and the beauty of natural colors. It challenges the misconception that early Islamic dress was solely about austerity and simplicity.
But then we have Imam Malik, the compiler of the Muwatta, expressing disapproval of gold for men, especially young men. Why the distinction?
This highlights that different items and adornments held varying cultural and spiritual significance. Gold, likely due to its association with wealth and status, was seen as potentially leading to arrogance and ostentation, particularly for younger men who might be more susceptible to such temptations.
Interesting. So it's not about a blanket prohibition against adornment, but about choosing items that align with the values of humility and simplicity. It's a reminder that cultural context plays a role in how religious guidelines are interpreted and applied.
Absolutely. And this section ends with Imam Malik expressing uncertainty about saffron-dyed wraps for men in private spaces. He doesn't offer a definitive ruling, which is fascinating in itself.
It raises an important question. Where does personal preference end and religious guidance begin? It's a question that resonates even today as we navigate our own choices and beliefs.
Precisely. It highlights the dynamic nature of religious interpretation and the challenges of applying ancient principles to contemporary contexts.
It seems like navigating these complexities was a part of life for early Muslims, just as it is for us today. And speaking of navigating complexities, the next section focuses on wearing silk, and it opens with a rather intriguing story.
Oh, yes. The story of Aisha, the Prophet's wife, dressing Abdullah ibn az-Zubayr in a silk shawl. She used to wear this short anecdote, raises some fascinating questions about the social and cultural norms surrounding silk garments.
Right, silk was a luxurious fabric often associated with wealth and status. So what could Aisha's gesture signify? Was it a simple act of kindness, or did it carry deeper implications?
It's difficult to say for sure, but it invites us to consider the various reasons behind her actions. Perhaps it was a sign of affection, a way to honor Abdullah, or even a subtle commentary on the evolving understanding of silk within the Muslim community. Remember, the permissibility of silk for men was a subject of debate among early scholars.
It definitely sparks curiosity, and it highlights the importance of considering the context and the individual stories behind these rulings and anecdotes. They're not just abstract rules, they are lived experiences that reflect the complexities of faith and human interaction.
Precisely, and those complexities become even more apparent as we move into the next section, clothes disapproved for women to wear. This section offers a glimpse into the emphasis on modesty and appropriate dress in early Islamic society. But it's not just about covering the body, it's about cultivating an inner awareness that guides one's outward appearance. And it starts with a story about Hafsa bint Rahman visiting Aisha, the Prophet's wife.
Okay.
Hafsa was wearing a thin headscarf.
Right.
And Aisha, seeing this, promptly tore it in two and replaced it with a wider one.
Well,
Yeah, it's a small gesture.
right.
But it speaks volumes about the importance placed on modesty and appropriate dress.
It seems like Aisha was quite particular about ensuring proper coverage. What's interesting is that she didn't just offer Hafsa a new headscarf. She actively replaced the one Hafsa was wearing. It underscores that clothing wasn't just about personal preference, but carried a communal dimension reflecting shared values and expectations.
Indeed. And this emphasis on modesty isn't just about outward appearances. It's about cultivating an inner awareness that guides one's choices and actions. And we see this reflected in a powerful hadith where the Prophet states, "Women who are naked, even though they are wearing clothes, go astray and make others go astray, and they will not enter the garden, and they will not find its scent. And its scent is experienced from as far as the distance traveled in 500 years.
Wow, that's a strong statement. It suggests that immodesty has spiritual consequences, not just for the individual, but for the community as a whole.
Exactly. It highlights the interconnectedness of our actions and the ripple effects they can have on others. The hadith isn't just about dress, it's about the responsibility we have to cultivate an inner state of modesty that is reflected in our outward appearance and behavior.
So it's not just about the clothes themselves, but the intention and awareness behind them. This makes you think about how we present ourselves in the world today. Do we dress in ways that align with our values? Are we mindful of the messages our clothing choices might convey? It's a question worth pondering.
Absolutely. And this theme of inner awareness and outward action is further emphasized by another hadith. The prophet stood up one night, looked at the sky, and exclaimed, "What treasures has the night opened? What trials have occurred? How many are dressed in this wanted and will be naked on the day of rising? Warn the women in their rooms."
It's powerful imagery, being naked on the day of rising. It suggests that worldly adornment can be fleeting and ultimately meaningless in the face of divine judgment.
That's right. It's a reminder to focus on what truly matters, cultivating a pure heart and a righteous character, rather than becoming attached to worldly possessions and outward appearances.
It's a sobering thought that challenges us to examine our own priorities and motivations. These hadiths make it clear that Islamic dress guidelines go beyond mere outward appearances and point towards a deeper inner transformation. They're about aligning one's outward actions with one's inner intentions and striving for a state of Ihsan that permeates every aspect of life.
You've hit the nail on the head, and this alignment extends beyond just covering the body. It encompasses attitudes and behaviors as well. In fact, the next two sections of the Muwatta focus on a very specific behavior, dragging one's garments. It might seem like a small detail, but it was considered a serious matter in early Islam.
Really, what was so wrong with dragging one's garments? Was it a safety hazard or something?
It wasn't about safety, it was about pride. The Muwatta repeatedly emphasizes the prohibition against men dragging their garments out of arrogance. It was seen as a manifestation of pride and ostentation, a direct contradiction to the humility and simplicity encouraged in Islam. Think of it this way: by dragging your garments, you're essentially drawing attention to yourself, displaying your fine clothes, and elevating yourself above others. It's a subtle but powerful way of expressing superiority.
I see. So it's about the intention behind the action. Even something as seemingly insignificant as the way you wear your clothes can reflect your inner state and your relationship with others.
Precisely, and the consequences of such arrogance were considered quite serious. There's a hadith where the prophet states that Allah will not even look at such a person on the day of judgment.
That's a powerful statement. It highlights the importance of humility and the dangers of allowing pride to corrupt our hearts.
And to further emphasize the seriousness of this matter, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, a companion of the prophet, offers a detailed explanation of the appropriate lower garment length for men. He mentions specific measurements, stating that anything lower than the middle of the calves is in the fire.
Wow, that's pretty specific. It seems like they really wanted to leave no room for ambiguity.
It highlights the importance of adhering to guidelines and striving for precision in one's actions. Remember, in Islamic belief, the Day of Judgment is a reality, and every action, no matter how small, will be accounted for, so even the length of one's garment could have eternal consequences.
It makes you realize that even the smallest details of our lives can have spiritual significance. We often think of religion as being about grand gestures and profound beliefs, but the Muwatta reminds us that it's also about the everyday choices we make, the way we carry ourselves, and the intentions behind our actions.
And this concern about dragging garments wasn't limited to men. The Muwatta also includes a section specifically addressing women dragging their garments.
It's interesting. I wonder if the guidelines are different for women, given the differences in their traditional attire.
You're right to point that out. The guidelines for women are indeed specific to their clothing in this section we hear about. Slama, one of the prophet's wives, asking him about the appropriate lower garment length for women. She wants to know how long her dress should be to ensure modesty without hindering her movement.
It's fascinating to see these women actively seeking guidance on how to live in accordance with their faith. They're not just passively accepting rules, but engaging in a dialogue about how to apply them to their daily lives.
And the prophet, in his wisdom, provides specific guidelines that balance modesty with practicality, he tells Slama, that the ideal length is a handspan, and if that leaves her uncovered, then the length of a forearm, but no more.
So it's about finding a middle ground, a balance between covering the body adequately and allowing for ease of movement.
Exactly. It's not about imposing a rigid standard, but about encouraging thoughtful consideration of one's attire and finding a solution that aligns with both the spirit and the letter of the guidelines. Remember, Islam emphasizes practicality and ease in all aspects of life, and this extends to dress as well.
It's fascinating how these details offer such a nuanced glimpse into the everyday lives of early Muslims and their approach to faith. It wasn't just about following rules blindly, but about seeking understanding, asking questions, and finding ways to live in accordance with their values in a practical and meaningful way.
Precisely, and this pursuit of understanding and balance takes an even more unexpected turn when we reach the next section, which focuses on, of all things, wearing sandals.
Sandals, really, I never would have thought footwear would warrant its own section in a book about dress and conduct what could be so important about sandals.
You might be surprised. It seems even footwear carried symbolic weight in early Islamic thought. The Prophet instructed his followers to wear both sandals or go barefoot, specifically forbidding wearing only one sandal. It might seem like a minor detail, but it highlights the importance of completeness and balance in all things, even in something as simple as footwear.
So it's not just about covering the feet, but about doing so in a way that reflects order and intentionality.
Exactly. And there's even a specific order for putting on and taking off sandals right foot first, when putting them on left foot first, when taking them off. These seemingly minor details emphasize the level of intentionality woven into everyday actions. Every step literally was an opportunity to express awareness and mindfulness.
It's amazing how they found spiritual significance in even the smallest details of life. It challenges us to look beyond the surface and consider the deeper meaning behind our actions, even something as mundane as putting on our shoes.
And speaking of deeper meaning, there's a curious story in this section about Kab al-Ahbar, a Jewish scholar who converted to Islam. He's mentioned questioning a man who took off his sandals, asking if he was referencing a specific verse from the Quran about removing sandals in a sacred place. It suggests that the act of removing one's shoes wasn't just practical. It could hold spiritual significance as well.
I see. So taking off your shoes wasn't just about keeping a place clean. It was about acknowledging its sanctity and entering it with humility and respect. It's like
Yeah.
taking off your hat in a church or temple. It's a gesture of reverence and submission.
Exactly. And then Kaaba poses the question that leaves us hanging. Do you know what the sandals of Prophet Moses, were? He then answers his own question. They were made from the skin of a dead donkey. It's a detail that sparks so many questions. What was the significance of the material? Was there a deeper symbolic meaning?
It's a reminder that we're just scratching the surface here. These stories are like doorways to a whole world of interpretations and cultural cross-pollination. It's fascinating to think about how different religious traditions intersect and influence one another, even in something as seemingly mundane as footwear.
Absolutely. And this deep dive into the Echoes of Ihsan continues in the next section, where we'll explore a variety of forbidden ways of dressing and the fascinating stories behind them. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our exploration of Ihsan, through the lens of dress and conduct in early Islam. We're about to delve into the final section of Book 48
Okay.
from the Muwatta Imam Malik, and from what I've heard, it's full of intriguing details.
It certainly is. This section focuses on ways of dressing.
Okay.
And while it might sound like we're about to get, fashion tips from the 8th century,
Right.
it's really about understanding how even the smallest details of clothing and behavior were seen as reflections of one's inner state.
Okay. I'm intrigued. So what kind of ways of dressing are we talking about here? What were some of the fashion faux pas someone could commit back then?
Well, the hadith we're about to unpack mentions 2 specific ways of dressing that were forbidden. The first one is described as sitting with one's legs drawn up to the chest, wrapped in a single garment that doesn't cover the genitals.
Oh, wow.
It's not exactly a pose that exudes modesty or decorum, and it probably wasn't very comfortable either.
I can imagine it being quite impractical.
Indeed, and the second forbidden way of dressing is wrapping a single garment over one arm and shoulder, restricting them.
So like binding one arm.
Yeah, essentially.
Okay.
Not exactly a graceful or efficient way to go about your day.
Right. Sounds pretty restrictive.
These forbidden ways of dressing seem to focus on practicality and modesty, promoting a sense of decorum and respect for oneself and others.
But then the hadith takes a bit of an unexpected turn. It goes on to mention 2 forbidden types of sales practices, mulamasa and munabasa.
Right.
What do those have to do with clothing?
That's where things get really interesting. The inclusion of these sales practices alongside the dress guidelines suggests a deeper connection between one's outward actions. You know, how one dresses, how one conducts business, and one's inner state. It's about recognizing that Ihsan isn't just about personal piety or outward appearance, but it extends to all aspects of one's dealings with others.
Okay, I'm starting to see the connection, but break it down for me. What exactly are mulamasa and munabaza?
So mulamasa refers to a sale where the buyer is obliged to purchase whatever they touch without having a chance to examine it properly or make an informed decision. Imagine walking through a crowded marketplace and accidentally brushing against a garment.
Oops.
And suddenly you're obligated to buy it whether you like it or not.
Oh, that sounds like a nightmare and incredibly unfair, it seems, designed to take advantage of people.
Exactly. It's a deceptive practice that lacks transparency and respect for the buyer, and munabaza is equally problematic. It involves 2 people throwing their garments toward each other, essentially agreeing to a blind trade without seeing what they're getting. It's like a high-stakes game of clothing roulette.
That sounds chaotic.
Yeah, where both parties are at risk of getting a raw deal.
So connecting these forbidden sales practices back to the concept of ihsan, it seems they're included alongside the dress guidelines. to emphasize that striving for excellence and virtue extends beyond personal piety. It's about treating others with fairness and respect, whether in personal interactions or business transactions.
Precisely. Ihsan is a holistic concept that permeates all aspects of life. It's about cultivating an inner awareness that guides our actions and leads to a more just and harmonious society. And to further emphasize this point, the Muwatta includes a story about Umar ibn al-Khattab encountering a silk robe at the mosque. He suggests to the Prophet that he purchase it for special occasions like receiving envoys.
I see silk robes sound pretty fancy. So I can see why Umar thought it would be fitting attire for receiving important guests.
But the Prophet's response is quite striking. He states, "Only a person who has no portion in the next world wears this."
Oh, wow. Talk about a fashion reality check. It seems extravagance and attachment to worldly possessions were seen as incompatible with a focus on the afterlife.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that our focus should be on cultivating inner virtues rather than accumulating worldly goods. And what makes this story even more interesting is that the very next line mentions that the Prophet was then brought some robes of the same material and gave one to Umar.
So the silk robes were okay after all.
Well, it does seem a bit contradictory.
It does.
Right. Umar expresses his confusion, pointing out the Prophet's previous statement about the silk robe.
Right.
But the Prophet clarifies, "I did not give it to you to wear."
So what was he supposed to do with it?
Umar ends up giving the robe to a brother of his who was still an idolater living in Mecca. It suggests that the issue wasn't with silk itself, but with the intent behind wearing it. In this case, giving the robe to his brother could be seen as an act of generosity, and perhaps even a subtle way to introduce him to the beauty and refinement of Islam.
Okay, so it was more about the intent.
Right, and to further drive home the point about humility and simplicity, the very last story in this section focuses on Umar ibn al-Khattab's own attire. We're presented with a powerful image. Umar, the leader of the Muslim community, wearing a garment with 3 patches sewn on top of each other.
I can't even imagine a world leader today wearing patched-up clothes. It's such a stark contrast to the ostentatious displays of wealth and power we often see.
Right, it's a powerful testament to the values of humility and simplicity that were held in such high regard in early Islam, even in a position of authority. Umar chose to exemplify these values through his own attire. It's a reminder that true leadership isn't about outward appearances, but about inner character and a commitment to serving others.
It seems like the concept of Ihsan permeated every aspect of life, from the grand gestures of leadership to the smallest details of dress and personal conduct. It's about striving for excellence in all that we do, both internally and externally, in our interactions with others and in our relationship with the divine.
And that's a message that resonates even today in a world that often emphasizes individuality and self-expression. It's easy to lose sight of the interconnectedness of our actions and the impact they have on ourselves and those around us.
This deep dive into the Muwatta Imam Malik has offered us a glimpse into a time and place where the act of dressing was seen as an opportunity to manifest virtue and cultivate a deeper connection with the divine.
And while the specific guidelines outlined in the text may not be directly applicable to our lives today, the underlying principles of Ihsan striving for excellence, seeking balance, and acting with intention and awareness remain timeless and relevant.
So as we wrap up this exploration of Ihsan, we're left with a question for our listeners. How can we bring the spirit of Ihsan into our own lives today? How can our choices, even in something as seemingly simple as dressing, reflect our values and aspirations? It's a question worth pondering as we navigate the complexities of modern life. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, may your pursuit of Ihsan guide you on your journey,